Now, this game was. We played a few pro games which were all pros, and the reason we're going to look at this game because this is the one game where we had non pros joining in. So, we actually had a couple players who were. I think they were 25 TS and like 18, 19. And that's a huge difference because everyone else, I believe, was over 30. And so you had. We'll see when we get in game, but this is actually not working. We're gonna have to wait for a little bit while this boots up. So I'm just gonna continue talking about this. We played this game where we had these non-pro players in it. There was a big contrast in the players and their skills, and it was very clear that part of the reason that the pro players are getting upset is because of the skill differences in these games. It's like they're playing with players who don't know how to play nearly as well as them, and it's frustrating because you can't count on them as allies. And so this is this team game where it feels like you don't have anyone on your team. So I've got the console off, and we have our players here. I've renamed all of them because I'm going to be criticizing one player in particular, and that's While You Die here. And I've named him such because he sits there and does nothing while everyone else dies, and that's the concern that I want to address for this game. So what we're seeing here, we have a couple 30 true skill players where Cart Killer and this guy over here has just snuck in just under the 30 true skill barrier. We have Meow, who's 26, and then we have a huge gap down here to While You Die at 18 true skill. And so the first thing we're going to notice about this is that the initial queues are mostly the same, but we've got one big difference already where we're building solar collectors on a very favorable wind generator map. We also have a solar collector over here, but only one of them, which I'd personally say isn't worth it, but this guy's about as good as I am, so I'm not going to complain too hard. We've got another one over here from the top player on this team. So yeah, again, we've got 3 solar collectors here, which is really inefficient, but we do have a factory and we do have scouts coming out. But the next thing we have is a laser tower here. And the big thing to note about a laser tower is it can't move. And that's important because all the fighting is going to be happening right in the middle of the map here. And so we've already got units coming out and skirmishing from the higher rated players in the middle of the map. But what we don't have is While You Die's units have taken a really long time to get to the middle of the map. And his commander's still in base. It's not assisting the factory. He's got very little build power. And he's used up all his resources on solar collectors. Let's look at this. He has 105 energy income. He has 80 energy income from the solars and spent 620 metal on that. We have 130 energy income from the wind generators and the solar over here, and it costs 2/3 of what While You Die has spent on his units. And now, here's one more thing to note. Because While You Die also, his laser towers aren't entirely protecting his base. And so in some ways, he's spent all these resources to poorly defend his base. Where if he'd have built 3 or 4 ticks, which is what I've sent over here, because I'm that guy. I've sent my 3 or 4 ticks over to deal with this tick that's been sent through here. And that is 60 metal for 4 ticks, while you die has built 2 laser turrets in his base for 170 metal, so 3 times as much metal, and hasn't dealt with the tick. And so at this point he's done just about nothing. He did send some scouts out, and I should have followed them out to give a full critique of his play, but they didn't achieve anything. And so yeah, he also has a radar and an anti-air in his base, which I will say a radar isn't the worst option. A radar would be pretty bad if you were over here on the side of the map, but it's okay if you're more to the middle of the map, because it does give me vision on where this tick is going. But generally it's not so useful, because you've got these 3 choke points here, which we have generally good vision of, so we're going to see anything that comes through anyway, and we're going to know it's in our base. So that radar is kind of useless. So is the anti-air, because at this stage in the game, you're not going to see any air on the map. It just doesn't happen. I mean, granted it could, but it generally doesn't. So that's a significant amount of metal wasted, or spent in his base. So we've got the solars as well, but we've got all these turrets, while we've got all these units on the front line, and we've actively got battle. So what we're seeing on the front line is Names Are Hard and Greatest Goat. They've got about the same army on the front line here. We've got a relatively comparable force from that guy and Lobby the Gov. I'm so good at namings. We do have extra units on here from weird symbols. I should have chosen a different name. And we've got a relatively balanced front line at this point, because we've got these units hanging back here from the pretender that equals symbols, yeah, we didn't have any units on the front from Meow over here, but now this is where we start to really see the difference. We have units from blue, purple, green, and blue on the front line. And so that's 5 people with units on the front line for south. But we have units for 1, 2, 3, 4 on the front line for north. And all the rest has been invested in this space here. And what does he do? Does he continue to build units? No. He builds an advanced solar. And so he's just queued up 240. He's just queued up 2,200 metal, actually 2,400 metal worth of buildings in his base, while there's fighting going on the front line, and everyone from the enemy has units on the front line. We've got a 2v2 here, we've got a 1v1 over here, and we have a 2v1 over here, and that's what's being created by this guy. While you die, is sitting there while his allies fight for him, and he is doing nothing. And this is where good players get mad at new players. This is actually worse than not having him on the team. Honestly, this is worse than not having him on the team, because names are hard. TM could have sent a constructor over here and got these metal extractors, but he's not going to have those metal extractors. And he's not going to have that extra metal income. He's not going to be able to build this. While you die is continuing to build solar collectors, where wind generators are actually significantly more efficient than even fusions and advanced solars on this map. So while you die is being terribly inefficient and not using what he's got. He is accessing a little bit of energy, about 100 per second, which is going to make a bit of a difference, and his allies could be converting it. And that would be good if his allies could be converting that. And I'll take a brief aside to say, I do reckon it would have been advantageous to bring my commander out to the front line sooner, and rather than sending all these constructors out, leave maybe 2 constructors in the base, and send the commander out to the front line. Because I've got all this build power in the form of nano turrets. Actually too much, because you can see that these nano turrets want to be using up to 28 metal per second. So I've already got too much build power for what I can use in the base, so it would be wise to have brought my commander out to the front line instead of these constructors, which are actually, in a moment they're going to die. So I'm going to keep complaining about the entire 2v1, because over here we've got Fashion facing off Meow and Cart Killer. And so that's actually the best matchup he could be having over here, because they're the 2 lowest rated on the team, and so he's actually able to hold against them for quite some time. But because both of them have been throwing out units on the front line, from Meow here, I'm actually going to do a bit of comparison. He is floating energy production at the moment, and he's spent 500 metal on wind generators. We have comparable energy income over here. Actually, we've got less energy income over here, and we've spent 4 to 5 times as much on our energy income, which means we have 1500 metal, which we haven't put on the front line. 1500 metal is 30 pawns. Enemy has 14 pawns, 2 resbots, and a laser tower. 30 pawns would be enough at this point to completely take out Greatest Goat and win the game. And that's the problem here. We have Meow putting our army on the front line, and he has, what? Let's say we have 17 grunts on the front line here. Actually, not quite true on the energy production. I didn't select those wind generators up there. So we've got 800 metal invested for Meow in wind generators, and we have 2000, so that's 1200. That's 1200 difference, which is 24 pawns that could be on the front line, which again would be enough on its own, even without Names Are Hard's army here. Those 24 pawns would be enough for even someone who can't micro well, like While You Die, to go in and completely take out Greatest Goat, and that would have changed the outcome of this game. North would have run right there. That would be it. That was all he needed to do. But he didn't. He did nothing. He built metal extractors, and he didn't use any of that metal on the front line, which means he didn't help his allies. The entire team is floating energy because energy is so cheap here. So the team isn't really converting the excess energy he's putting out. He's not even converting the excess energy he's putting out. So he's building a bunch of solar collectors that he's not even using and is letting his team die. And so while he does nothing, we've got Fashion over here. He's playing a 1v2. He is vastly outnumbered in army. That's 1,000 metal in army against almost 2,000 metal in army. He's using his army way more efficiently, and you'll see that he's got, he's resurrected a bunch of units. Actually, they're probably his own units, mostly, that have been resurrected. But he's taking out units with range, but he's just completely overwhelmed, and so the enemy can, like, fight at, like, a 50% damage efficiency and still kill him. Or it would have to be, like, a 51% damage efficiency. It's like, he's got no HP left on his commander. He's got no units. It's like, all these guys would have to do is run through this gap here. They probably wouldn't get all the way to the base, because he'd throw up some laser towers. But this army standing here is 17 pawns against... Actually, no, that's more comparable than I thought it was. They would have had to grab these other units and some of the tanks. But now because me and Symbols have messed up here, we've let units through. This is another great point to make about something that lower ranked players tend to do, is they will go T2 way too early. And so what's happening here? So he's actually spending too many resources on this T2 factory. He could use these constructors to reclaim the grunts. Even if all he did was he grabbed all his constructors and made them repair this laser turret, that would have been enough, probably, to kill these grunts. But what's going to happen, he's going to lose this entire 2,000 metal investment in this factory. You see how fast this laser tower was finished after he stopped working on the factory? If it had just stopped working on the factory in the first place, he might have saved it. But no, he basically loses his entire base to a handful of grunts because he tried to go T2 and left the front line essentially 1v2. That's probably what happened there. He also pulled out off the front line, and now we have the first units coming out from While You Die, and while Names dies, he's sitting here with his army holding back and letting the fight go on over there, letting Greatest go take advantage of his advantage. Lobby the Gov even sent some units around, and for the first time in the game, he still hasn't fired a shot and stands well back behind his enemy's his allies' army. And he takes out a unit. Awesome. Unfortunately, and it's like, you see how few units came and took this out? If it have brought that out earlier, how long were those metal extractors there? He could have just taken them out. And so maybe this is the biggest lesson for new players. All you need to do is you need to use your army. I'm not saying suicide your army, like Names Are Hard is doing over here, but just use your army. Join in the fight. If a pro player's fighting, join in the fight. If there's something completely undefended, scout it out with a tech and see that it's undefended. You don't want to walk into a trap, but use a tech or a grunt, scout it, see that it's undefended, and then kill it. And his come in and helped here. And that's been powerful. And Names Are Hard is going to get a ton of resources and then go T2 and die because he went T2. But while you die has also stopped building anything. He has 1,500 metal in storage. That could be enough to right now finish that factory. It could be enough. 1,500 metal, again, that's 30 pawns. That would be enough. It possibly wouldn't take out the base, especially handled by a new player, but with the other tanks here, it could. Because we've got a relatively even army and defense on the front line, so 30 pawns would completely change the tide of the battle. And by this point I could go on saying it's like, well, this front is relatively stable and okay, but if you had like 30 pawns over here, this would secure the metal, get all the reclaim, take out the army, get a ton more reclaim, and at least be able to hold the choke point and keep fashion alive. If we had, say, the extra, probably again 1,500 metal from this guy over here, that would be a whole 10 thugs or something, which again would be enough to hold this choke point and keep this alive, secure a bit more metal, get more reclaim, get an even bigger army. What with... Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Can I just draw everyone's attention to this number in the bottom left corner here? We had 4 T1 bombers come over at a cost of 600 metal. And this is the amount that Names Are Hard has invested into anti-air. Yeah, so we have 4 anti-air bots covering less than half of the map at this point from him. And that's 2,600 metal. Compare that to the 11... Yep, they're all mine. The 11 anti-air bots that I have put out, it's still more than the cost of 4 bombers. And that's one of the things with bombers. You can generally get the enemy to invest more in anti-air than you invested in the bombers. And so that's one of the positives about bombers. But I've got 11 anti-air covering the entire map. They're Tech 1, and so that's half the price, covering more than double the area, and is a much more reasonable response to the amount of air that was sent over. So on top of that, we've got an idle T1 factory. We've got an idle T2 factory over here. He's building... we're actually getting some more units out from While You Die here, but he's also reclaiming on the front line, and so he's actually going to be accessing a lot of these resources to his allies, which is okay. It's like at least they're going to allies, but he really should be using them. But the team universally is just not using the resources they have. Not even me. I've only got like 300 metal in storage, but and a bunch of that's probably overflow from well, partly from him, partly from this Symbols, who has 4,000 metal in storage. For reference, 4,000 metal is about 100. Did I do that right? Yeah. 4,000 metal is about 110. It would be 111 grunts for 4,000 metal. For that exact number, it would be more like 180 or some 108 or something like that. I can't math. But that's just to emphasize it's like how much resource North has in storage. And so, and we don't have units coming out, or it's like we say 4,000, that could be 20 fiends, which could totally swarm this front line. It's like, you don't want to be building, like, if we've got all 4 Tech 2 mexes queued up here for names are hard, you don't want to be building Tech 2 mexes at this stage in the game, because they cost 640, so 4 of them is about the price of 3 fiends each, so that's 12 fiends at least. I mean, we've actually queued up another one, so that's 14 fiends. 14 fiends would be plenty enough to take some more metal on this front. They would be plenty enough to completely take out this all the way back to here, which would secure more metal extractors and potentially open up this and securing this metal over here. It would win this battle over here completely. And this battle is about to be lost because we have the middle guy coming through, which is, yeah. And so this game is just going to be over from this point. So yeah, we have units coming out. No, we have a handful of units coming out from While You Die, and then he just stops sending units, and he's just AFK, essentially, building Tech 2 mexes and doing nothing. So if we just look at this, if we look at the damage dealt, I mean, we do have reduced damage dealt from symbols, because again, he hasn't been using his resources and building an army that can do damage. But While You Die in particular he's got a reasonable damage efficiency, sure, but he's done basically nothing. And built a ton of generated a ton of resources which he never used. And sat with them in storage, and if they're not in storage, they've been invested into all these solar collectors here. Those solar collectors, that's 3,000 metal for 500 energy. We have 1,500 metal, so 1,500 metal for 700 energy per second. And then we're going to be building Tech 2 metal extractors while the front collapses, while we lose an entire player. And then he's going to take this player. Granted, he'd been resigned for a little while, and so no one had noticed, and so it's kind of cool that someone took him. But it's also like, why? Because he doesn't use any of the units put out. But the game was over anyway by that point. And so that we'd try to call that a GG, but it honestly, it didn't feel like it. and everyone was upset after that game. I mean, the enemy team is always bothered less by having a player in the game that's doing nothing. Like, it's not on their team, they don't worry as much, but everyone's bothered by that. And one of the biggest problems with rage quitting, with trolling, with flaming, all of that stuff, is players like that who sit there, build maybe 20 pawns in the entire game, something like that, maybe a bit more, I'm not sure exactly, but build a handful of units in the entire game, spend their resources poorly, and then just do nothing for most of the game. He did something for part of the game, but compared to every other player in the game, he was a complete deadweight. He might as well have not been there. In fact, it would have been better if he wasn't there, because his allies could have built the metal extractors that he built. And this is actually something the guy beside him complained about. I turned chat off because it's broken with the way that I changed the names and everything. But that was actually something the guy beside him complained about. I know it's harsh, but it's true. And so, if you're playing with people about the same skill as you, it's better to have you there. But if you're playing on the same team as people who are 2 to 3 times as good as you, and like, there are things you can do to make it worth you being there. Like, if you have resources in storage, you can share them. You can make sure you're using your resources efficiently and building the same things that your allies are building. So if they're building wind generators, don't build solar collectors, build wind generators, follow their lead, build the same units that they're building. Follow their lead, and you'll learn about what's good, and sure, you can try stuff, you can make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I made a bunch of mistakes that game. I took far too long to get my commander out to the front line. That guy isn't completely new. He's very new compared to everyone else in the game, but he's not completely new. That guy would have around, While You Die would have around at least 100 hours in the game. That's not completely new. And besides, like, if he was completely new, that just also kind of demonstrates the point of, it's like, well, if you've got someone completely new in this game with all these good players, it's like, even if you're completely new, you really have to pay attention and at least work with your allies, because what's going to make your teammates mad is if you take resources and you sit there and do nothing with it. At the very least, do something with it, communicate, ask for advice. If what you're doing isn't working, say, hey, I don't know what to do. Can someone tell me what to do? And at the very least, even if you mess up, even if nothing goes your way, and if all you do is end up donating, at least you tried, at least you improved, and your teammates will respect you for that. But what you wouldn't have been able to see that game is that While You Die did none of that. He didn't chat, he didn't communicate, he didn't use his army, he didn't build an army, and he did nothing. And so that's an extreme. Not all players are that bad, but the reason I bring up the extreme is because it happens often enough that's why players rage quit. That's why there's such animosity between players. And that's why the pro games happen that are locked to just 30 true skill plus and Flo. Because Flores is actually a pretty good player, even if his rank doesn't reflect it. And he's a very good team player, and he's got a lot of respect in the community, even if his skill isn't maybe on par with the other pros. And if you are that player who is really good to work with, even if you're not that great at the game, at least you can work with your allies, you can cooperate with them, you'll support them, you'll use what you have as best as you can on the front line, and you'll use your units to help the team, and you'll cooperate. And cooperation is really the key. You're a team, you have to cooperate. And I know that cooperation is really hard